Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Kaufman. I am a writer at the Los Angeles Times, and I'm so excited because we have two very special guests here tonight for a Q&A. First, we have Christopher Dillion Quinn, the director of Eating Animals. And then the producer of the film, who also did the narration, Natalie Portman.
Hello.
Did you guys enjoy it? Yeah.
Thank you all for being here.
So, as I'm sure most of you guys are aware, this is based on a book written by Jonathan Safran Foer that came out in 2009. And Natalie, you were friends with Jonathan, right, before he had written that book?
Yeah, Jonathan I've known since I was in college, so almost 20 years now. And he sent me the manuscript of the book when it was about to be published. And I remember reading it because I was pregnant with my first child who's now just turned 7. So I remember exactly the moment of reading it and really connecting to the way he talked about wanting to impart values through food to his child and wondering what to feed his kids, and sort of going through the same process myself while about to bring a life into the world.
And you said, like, instantly after reading it, you wrote him and said, not only do I love this, but I think this should be a documentary.
Well, I called him after and was, of course, very effusive in my praise for the book, because I'm sure many of you have read the book as well. And if you haven't, I highly recommend reading it. It's a very different experience than the film, complementary kind of companion pieces. But I was just so moved and changed by it, and it felt like information that I wanted to share. And I thought, if it could be in film form, that there was a different audience that could be reached.
Yeah. And Christopher, when you heard from Natalie and Jonathan that they wanted to adapt this nonfiction book into a doc, were you like, how will I do this? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, well, the book is kind of atypical, right? It's not only a survey, so it bounces all over the place, but it was also just this really cool kind of structured book that made it very difficult to think of. But all the information in it and the storytelling compels you to want to make it into a film. I mean, I think that's why you were, and I know other. Marshall Curry, who's also a doc filmmaker, he's like, when I read that book, I only thought of it as translated into a documentary. So, but I mean, the difficulty was really there's open letters, from the farmers, and that was kind of what we really hooked ourselves into in terms of turning it into a subject-driven narrative, and that's what we all kind of agreed on in the early throes, and we stuck with it and just hung with the farmers and saw kind of the big, long, dark shadow of corporate farming, how it affects their lives individually.
How did you find the farmers that you focused on in the film, and were any of them hesitant to participate given that this was their livelihood and they were speaking out against some big corporations?
Well, I mean, so like the turkey farmer Frank Reese in Kansas, he was in the book, so that was an easy one. Just like Paul Willis, who was from Iowa, was also in the book. But we put feelers out to try and find a contract farmer that would be willing to talk to us, and that took about 1.5 years because obviously it would, if they spoke, it would ruin their lives. But Craig had reached that boiling point, as he talks about in the film, and so to our luck, Compassion and World Farming connected us to him, and at that time he was speaking to Nicholas Kristof at the New York Times, and they did a big expose, and it kind of, it blew up, as he says.
Yeah. There's certainly some images that are hard to watch for animal lovers, or for anyone really, I think, of when you see how the animals are being treated. How did you decide how much of that to include, and were you guys worried about people not wanting to see that? Because I'm sure it's hard.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was definitely something we talked about at the beginning, that of course it's a part of the conversation that can't be left out, the animal suffering and the animal cruelty. But at the same time, particularly for those people who care a lot, and actually it's quite universal that most people do not believe in cruelty to animals. Almost everybody can agree on that, and people certainly don't like watching it. That we didn't want to create something that would make people want to push the movie away or want to leave at that point or want to turn it off if they're watching it at home or something. So that was a conversation from the beginning. How do we include this as part of the conversation that's necessary, but also not alienate viewers?
Yeah, but I mean, because we, so a lot of organizations like Mercy for Animals gave us their library or access to their library. So we were digging through all these hours.
From like undercover sort of.
Undercover, and it was just, you could see immediately if you just, it would like, you would watch it for a day and it would destroy your week. It was some really bad stuff. I mean, we always say this is like the PG, version of some of the material that's actually out there. And so I came to it naturally. I was just like, this really is affecting me it buries the lead of the overall story, because you can't get, once you see some of the really bad stuff. So we were very thoughtful about what to include and what not to include.
Can you guys both talk a little bit about more of your perspective of how you came to the film, in terms of your opinions on eating meat, and did you try to take a step back and be impartial, or did you want that influence in the movie?
Well, I mean, I think Christopher is really the responsible for the creation of the film, so I wouldn't say that I had a piece in shaping that, but I think it was intentional not to tell people what to do. I think we didn't want to scold anyone. We didn't want to, no one likes being told what they should or shouldn't do, but a way, of course, like all documentaries, of telling a story and showing lives that you wouldn't normally encounter in your daily life. And I think that that human connection, seeing the effect on the people, seeing the effect on what happens when the environment is degraded, what happens to these people, what happens when the way the corporate control of the market affects these individual farmers, that seeing the human impact hopefully moves people and affects people and makes some change.
Yeah. You became a vegan after reading Jonathan's book. When you talk about your lifestyle, like what kind of reactions do you get, and how do you sort of open people up to having these discussions about these issues without, like you were saying, feeling like you're stuffing it down people's throat?
Well, I think just emphasizing that, I don't want anyone to judge me. I hate people have a lot of like assumptions and judgments about vegans, as I'm sure the vegans in the audience might experience, and it's annoying, and no one wants to be, judged for your choices. And also like laughing at people having like beliefs is also I feel like people make fun of you for like, oh, you have to be so earnest with everything you do kind of thing, So there's a little bit of like embarrassment almost around it, but it is something I care about. It is something I believe is wrong. It is something I believe is destroying the planet, and not just believe, but there is evidence, factual evidence for. And so to share that and hope that people make some change, and also not be judgmental of other people when talking about it, but also creating other ways. Jonathan talks a lot about this kind of like you don't have to like pick a food identity. Like
That's Christopher. Because I asked him and the director and Christopher, Christopher and Jonathan, do you guys identify as vegetarian or vegan? They're like, no, we don't like to put a label on it. And I was like, why? But explain.
Well, because I having spent 5 years kind of in this arena, it becomes very divisive, and I think that ultimately is problematic for kind of moving into the future and creating change. And so everybody, all of a sudden, it's food. It's a weird thing, but like, I'm a meat eater. You go over there. I'm a vegetarian. You kind of hover over here, and then a vegan's over here. And it seems like those labels kind of complicate things to kind of getting to where we need to go. And that was one of the things that we definitely didn't want to have. Like in the film, if you came in Duluth, Minnesota and watched the film, that there would be something there for you. And that was something that we really worked hard to do.
Aptly chosen city.
Oh, thanks. But it was like a, you know, Duluth, you know. Yeah. But the idea of like, you know, not making it that conversation, I think. And I don't, you know, I mean, I would consider, I guess, myself still a meat eater. I ate Frank's turkey in San Francisco 2 months ago. Or no, less than that. It was a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember. But it was probably 2 years since I had turkey. And so I'm probably more aligned to your...
Did you feel odd?
A little bit. But, you know, it was with, you know, Frank was right there sitting next to me. So
No pressure.
kind of like, you know, I don't know. It was, yeah. But, you know, this whole thing radicalized my diet, too, because when Jonathan and Natalie... When I first met with them, I was like, you kind of got the wrong guy. You kind of eat meat, you know? And they thought that was actually a really good thing in a lot of ways. And now I kind of see what they were thinking about because I went through this process and now I've radicalized my diet for all the reasons that you're talking about that matter to me. It's like we're on a crash course, you know, if we continue to accelerate our population and eat meat, we're going to have to move from 50 billion animals raised annually to 100 billion. And where are we going with that? I mean, how many animals have to be raised? And all the while, we're already destroying our, you know, the environment. The animals have never suffered more. And so these things kind of crept into my consciousness as soon as we started to film.
I like that the movie doesn't say, you know, you have to cut it out entirely. It's like Meatless Mondays, or just, you know, you can reduce, even reducing a little bit will have an impact. And that's clearly an editorial choice to decide to show that perspective. Why go that route instead of, you know, being a little bit more extreme, I guess?
Well, you might have I think a lot of the reason is because there's films out there that have already covered that in a lot of ways, and all this stuff that's in the film I really didn't know before I read the book or before I went through the process of actually making the film. So in a lot of ways, I wanted to include it because I was learning along the way, and I just felt like it's better to have this body of evidence and leave the room open for people to draw their own conclusions. I think we worked, or at least tried to work hard to provide that, you know. That seemed to be the way to go anyway.
And I think people know themselves. You know, I think people know if you're the type of person who can make extreme choices or changes or whatever, or if you're someone who's going to like try most of the time and sometimes, you know, it doesn't work out, and that all makes an impact. Like everyone trying a little bit makes a huge impact, as opposed to people just being like, oh, I can't do that. I could never not eat meat ever again. You know, it's better to say, oh, I could do that once a day or once a week.
Yeah, I think it's a really overwhelming concept for people, you know, thinking about cutting out meat. And why do you, I mean, especially in this country, it's like such a like, we eat meat and potatoes. Like, why do you think that's so entrenched in the culture, eating meat?
It's been a big marketing campaign, like, for a long time.
They spend a lot of money, yeah.
Even the statistics, and there's statistics in the book, I remember, of like in the 50s, how much people ate meat and how it's just become, you know, many times more than that because of concerted ad campaigns that put, you know, I was so surprised when I went to Europe for the first time and saw that they don't have like eggs for breakfast. And I was like, oh, I thought eggs were breakfast food. And they're like, nope, that was a campaign to make eggs and bacon like part of an American breakfast. That's our country. So it's been, I mean, everyone remembers the Got Milk ads when we were growing up, like,
which she never did.
it didn't do. But like that was to tell people that like adults should be drinking a glass of milk to be healthy, which is not true. Like that's not a good idea. So it's all marketing.
Paid for by your taxpayer dollars too.
Natalie, producing this film, obviously you're still busy acting all the time. Is this something what was the experience like? Do you think you want to do more of it, like in the doc world?
Well, I have to say, I mean, I cannot claim to have been, when you see a director working 5 years tirelessly, his entire life, his entire, energy and brain power and everything all consumed by this. It's hard to say that it was any like big deal that I feel like I, was like, oh, it would be cool to make a documentary of this. Find this director.
Do the work.
Call
sir.
some people, and then he goes for 5 years, and then I'm here at the end. So really, it's Christopher. But yeah, it was great for me.
How many hours were you in the sound booth on that narration?
We did a few rounds of that, but still nothing compared to 5 years.
How did you decide to narrate it, by the way? Like, was that your idea?
Well, I don't even think of narration until the very end, because if it's something that comes in as a last. The whole angle in the edit is like, what is the least amount of narration we can put into the film? And so it came up kind of quick, and we knew we were going to go to Telluride. So we had already started. Kind of, there were many iterations, but actually 3. We laid down 3 different ones, and we kind of refined them and shortened them and talked about that. The idea of using the pronoun usage, so it's like he, she, we, instead of just doing the omniscient I.
Yeah.
And we played around with it a lot, but in the end, it came down to. It was a good replacement because Jonathan in the book, it's a very personal. There's almost the beginning is about his grandmother coming out of a concentration camp and starving, and how it related to so many things down the road to him, and it's a beautiful story. But in a lot of ways, it was nice to have some sort of voice that was outside of the individual narrative stories, and that's kind of where Natalie's voice came in, and I think did a really great job of kind of making us think collectively of ourselves, like they went down the road instead of, and that was just a choice we decided to create that atmosphere through the narration.
Can you talk about, I think this is an interesting story about like how the footage of the pink slime sort of lagoons wouldn't have even been able to be shot given the current laws that are in place, the gag laws?
Yeah, I mean, we were just really lucky. Or, when we were down there, we went down a number of times, so I think probably 4 or 5 times. And by the second or third time, we were always followed. There were these, so Murphy Brown security would follow us, and then by the 5th time, we were just like, "How you doing?" It was like we both had our jobs, and we punched the clock. But
got a little bit like testy with that one guy on the street in the road.
Yeah, which is actually it's kind of amazing because while that was going on, that was the closest I'd ever come to a pink lagoon, and I actually, it knocked all the oxygen out of me, so I was actually gagging the whole time. So
What is it like?
Well, it's methane, so it zaps your oxygen. So I was crying from the methane, and then I was gagging, and I was looking around at everybody, and they were used to it. So I was the newbie. And so while he's yelling at me, I was actually just off camera gagging.
Wow. Let's open it up to some questions, and definitely questions, not comments, if that's possible. Thank you. Right here.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you guys a question about adaptation in general. Natalie, whether it's with Tale of Love and Darkness, which I really, really love, or with this film, taking a book that you know and love yourself, and knowing that the film is possibly going to reach a wider audience than the book, the picking and choosing process. I just love if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's actually interesting that you brought up A Tale of Love and Darkness, because I feel like the greatest directive I've ever heard about that was from the author of that book. Said to me, the book exists make something different. And I think that's really great as sort of an adaptation concept, because if you love a book enough to adapt it, you hope that people still read it and aren't watching the movie as like a replacement for reading the book. And hopefully that the movie, if they haven't read the book already, like will make them go and read it and have a different experience. And so similar to what I was saying before, just trying to make them their own animals.
That was the movie you directed, but yeah. Right there.
Hi, thank you. My father died when he was only 33 of a heart attack. He was raised on an egg shipping farm in Maine, and cholesterol has killed him. I have a Bachelor of Science in Nutrition because of that. That's how I grew this belly. Science. But my question is, I tried to stay vegan most of my life, and it's difficult. But I wonder if you could comment more on the Beyond company, which I believe is in Southern California, isn't it? Is that the case?
El Segundo.
New home of the LA Times, guys. Yep.
You can hustle right across the street and get a
At least
Beyond
I can
Burger.
get a damn Beyond Burger there.
Yeah, I mean, so we looked at all the plant-based, and that it grew up so quickly. You know, there's Just, which used to be they made Just Mayo, and they're a company that's kind of, I don't know exactly where they sit, but they're having a hard time kind of scaling up right now. And then I met Ethan. I met a lot of like the Impossible Burger crew, and I also met Memphis Meats, which is the test tube meat that they're working on, you know, that they can brew flesh, you know, and it's not even from an animal. Yeah, yeah, it's coming. But something about Ethan was really, you know, he kind of grew up on a farm, and he just, you know, he seemed to align himself with what he's doing, with where we're heading, and all the problems that are, you know, so that's why I ended up, you know, highlighting him more than anything else. Is he was everything he did, you know, the reason why he grew, Beyond Meat into what it was is because he's worried about the future, and that seemed to be that align with my sensibilities or my fear, because I just kind of came into this story and realized, holy crap, we're in trouble. And he was thinking about that for years. But I don't know if anybody's tried the Impossible Burger or the Beyond Burger, but they're amazing. I mean, they're amazing. You know, all this kind of plant-based alternatives are like, it's kind of, and that seems to be a good recipe for the future too. Is if you're gonna opt out, you know, once or twice a week, it seems like a really reasonable thing to do, to look at these plant-based alternatives. At least that's what I did.
And I love the thing he says about like that they used to call electricity a gaslight substitute. It's so great because it's true. It's at a certain point it should become normalized and be its own thing.
It just becomes electricity. Yeah.
Okay. Couple more right there. The eager.
Yeah. Hi, thank you so much for the film. I appreciate it. My name is Olympia Osset, and I have an organic grocery that makes it easy and affordable for people to eat well in food deserts. Awesome. So African Americans are the leading consumers of meat in this country, and I'm wondering if you guys are employing any strategies to make sure that this message gets to the low-income people and the people who are doing most of the consuming of these goods, because they live in places where it's hard to get fruits and vegetables, and if you guys need help with that.
Yes. We do need help spreading the word, and it's something. When we had them film in the Telluride Festival, we showed to a group of high school students who said this to us, who were like, "We know, and we can't buy an apple in our neighborhood, and like we don't lack this information, we lack the access." So, yes. Let us know and how we can, you know, link to what you're doing. And yeah, we need help spreading the word, because it is absolutely a question of access. And it's part of the angering thing about this is the like disproportionate impact it has on low income communities, and you know, how cheap, unhealthy food is being being really promoted.
And I liked what you said about how like a lot of people tend to say, like, well, just go to a fancy farm or, like, go to the farmer's market. And it's not like everyone can just do that.
Yeah, well, there is, like, the elitist question of, like, oh, we're just going to buy humanely sourced meat or whatever. And you're like, okay, that's like $100. You know, it's like that's not the answer. And truly, like, plant-based diet is among the most affordable diets in the world. Like, rice and beans is like the staple of every, you know, cuisine in the world for the general population. So it's definitely possible. And these newer meat substitutes, or, you know, electricity food, will also hopefully meet that demand for lower cost vegan, vegetarian food.
And just to add to that, I mean, I'm working with somebody who has started this organization called Brigade, but it's kind of trying to address food deserts in a way, but he's specifically with schools, because as you saw in the film, and I just touched on it briefly, but it's this idea that anytime there's a surplus of meat or cheese or dairy, the industry just goes to the U.S. government and then demands that they buy it. And so then they deposit it on our kids, you know. So you can see if the dairy industry is not doing really well, your kid's menu at school will have lots of cheese pizza and cheese this and that. And it's as simple as that, you know, that the Dairy Council can go to USDA and say, we have a bunch of surplus stuff and we deposit it on our kids' lunch. But there's a guy that I work with that is trying to take scratch cooking back into the schools, because his whole argument is that if you do it in the schools, then there'll be a demand when they actually start to purchase food on their own. They'll, you know, to start the cycle early and have it, resonate in school. And so he's working in New London right now, but New York City's just hired him to do the whole New York City food program. But what was really great is he just invited them in, the whole community in, for scratch cooking once a week, and it's really had a big effect. So he's somebody that would be great to talk to you about. I mean, that would be a good person to maybe link with.
We have time for one more. One more, right there.
Thank you. Given the fact that it appears your broader goal is that to get people to make the decision to reduce their animal meat consumption, and given the fact that you seem to have focused on the inhumane treatment to animals and the unhealthful conditions the animals endure, is there some reason you chose not to spend a few minutes talking about simply the new evidence of ill health to human beings from eating animal meat?
Yeah, well, I mean, I like to think that we did cover it, but maybe we didn't cover it enough, and that's a editorial note I wish I had earlier. But there are, you know, so there's Neil Bernard, and he speaks very specifically about that, and, you know, we, of course, had a lot more of Neil Bernard talking about how, you know, it's an enormous problem, but also commodity meat, you know, the corn-fed beef is much more of a problem than grass-fed, grass-finished beef, and it throws your body way out of sorts. And there's a lot of health problems that come from it, right? So yeah, I mean, I took the film and looked at it through three lenses: human health, which is what you're addressing, and maybe we fell a little short on that. But also animal suffering, and then environment. And those things are, you know, no matter which one you care about, they're all interconnected. And it's one of those things in the end, I think, that at least looking at all the evidence, I realized that, I can't support this system, you know. So, but human health is a huge issue. And we went to India, and you can see the empirical data is there. Like, you know, So groups are eating, in urban centers, they're eating more meat than they ever have, and their type 2 diabetes is skyrocketing. Heart disease is skyrocketing, morbid obesity skyrocketing. So the evidence is all there. Neil Barnard said, I hate what's going on in India, but I also love the data, because it's the first time they've been able to see, here's a mostly vegetarian country, and now they've adopted the so-called Western diet, and we're seeing these incredible numbers of human, the human health is really going down the drain. So it's a good point, and it's an endless story. I mean, it's really a documentary onto its own.
Great questions, you guys. And let's give a big round of applause to Natalie
Thank
and
you all.
Christopher.
Hope you have a great weekend. Thank you all for being here.
We're going to let them head out
Thank you.
first, and then you guys, thank you again for coming.
Thank you.